We have working Traptrix for you today. That's actually really cool to see. We have some ancient warriors to discuss and some of the other innovations of the meta. Make sure you guys smash the link, grab out of that subscribe button so you guys don't miss out on more awesome content. So I've been enjoying some of the discussion points out here of people trying to explore things like Traptrix in the new meta and trying to figure out what are going to be probably the most optimized builds for the meta, at least trying to figure out things you can do. And I mean, shifters plus dimensional fissures out here definitely give this deck maybe not so much like the greatest edge in the world, but enough that you can play against some of the rest of the meta and be able to do well. I do see we were playing one of the copy of the terrifying Trap Hole Nightmare, which is pretty cool to see. We are still doing one copy of the Trap Trip Garden. Now, one interesting thing about this list that a few people might have an issue with is there's no Pot of Prosperities in here. There's no Pot of Extra. We're not actually seeking any real raw advantage through the pot cards. And that's actually kind of interesting to see that, you know, we're staying a little bit further away from some of those options. I think is kind of interesting in terms of the deck build. Now, side deck is all just hand trap, hand trap, hand trap. I actually have the macrocosm. It is kind of interesting to know that if you are playing this deck and you do kind of find yourself in these situations, you're like, okay, well, we need to set up how many floodgates and be able to do your thing. I mean, between the shifters, the die-fis, and this, you should be in a fantastic position. And the rest of your extra deck down here, I think should be able to carry most of your options that you need. This build is playing 2 copies of Doomsday Star, which I do kind of like. You will find yourselves in some situations where Traptrix will just have some issues where they can't really maybe recover too much from a field, or, you know, they have to be able to watch their opponent set up another field, and they're like, okay, well, this is where we have the double Doomsday Star actually being a little bit of a relevant choice for this. So that's actually kind of cool. Outside of that, deck relies on the anti-meta floodgates to allow this a decent chance to be able to do its thing, and of course Pedal Exceeds for extensions. Easy stuff. Now this was actually really cool to see. Ancient Warriors are one of those decks that you take a moment to look at in the course of the meta, and you're like, oh, hey, you know, this is one of those decks that, you know, seems like it could do well. Now, some interesting ratios for this. I do see we are playing double copies of Tenki instead of maximizing on 3, which is fine. You're also playing 2 droplets in here, so you can set up some very basic board breaker stuff to kind of be able to do your thing. One other interesting little thing along the way here is we are main decking a singular Raigeki in here, which I'm kind of okay with this, honestly. The fact that, you know, these one-ofs can kind of come up, I do find to be a little bit interesting. Now, in terms of the extra deck developments, you're playing things in here, like, you're actually focusing on a Nightmare Cerberus instead of, like, a Nightmare Phoenix. So, it's kind of interesting. To be fair, I guess being able to blink out a special summon monster your opponent controls is actually a little bit more important than some other stuff. And this is hilarious. This build is actually playing a copy of Silent Honor Arc, and I had to think about this. They're really, in terms of your rank 4 options for a deck like this, you don't have the greatest things in the world for you to be able to play. So being able to answer a special summon, you are also leaving this in for time. This is in case your opponent generates such a huge, crazy field. This definitely gets you back to the Tenki and things so you can actually play the game. And then, of course, since we do have waters in here, which is actually kind of funny, we actually can set up the Totally Awesome. Definitely surprised that they're not trying like a Zeus or a Doomsday Star in here as well to kind of consider some of the other options and things that you can do, but it just proves that you have room to explore the rest of this deck and see, you know, hey, maybe there is something else that I want to try in terms of the deck development. So, okay, seems actually pretty worthwhile. All right, what else we got going on back here? Logan Jaya brought to the table the interesting conceptual theory of this again. You know, I swear, you look at this, you're like, oh, you know, we have a Drytron deck in the meta again. You're like, so exciting. And then it's like, okay, nope. It's a culprit of Beatrice being a degenerate card down here that you got to look at and go, oh, okay. Now, this is also something kind of funny. We have seen a couple of decks. We've seen Sword Soul try the idea of playing this because it ensures that you can actually make the Cyber Harpy fusion or synchro, and then all you got to do is be able to get to the Featherstorm, which you could technically thrust on into, which you do see here that we do have a thrust present in this list, which is fine. Outside of that, I mean, you're still going to go down the standard Drytron plays. Ben 10 is everything that this deck wants to have. It bridges the gap. It gets you to the chance to be able to get to the Vanities Ruler setup. So typically your ideal end board is probably going to be a Vanities Ruler with the Beatrice dumping down the second piece of this combo puzzle here. So your opponent just kind of looks at you and goes, huh, I don't know what to do about this, actually. This is actually a real issue, and understandably so, actually. The fact that most decks kind of can't interact with this, I do have a little bit of an issue with myself. Outside of that, the fact this has 2 turn skips in here is actually kind of insane. I guess, you know what? If you can manage to continue to put this many turn skips into a deck and be able to have it work out for you, I gotta clap for it. Like, it just proves that there is some real degeneracy still left in this game, and this extra deck still has room for improvement. Okay, wow, more Magispectors. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been trying to cover as much Magispector as we actually can for this list, because now that Kieran is back, a lot of people have genuinely been like, hey, you know, what's the play here? What are we doing? What is the developments for the meta? So basically, Kieran is still going to be the non-targeting bounceroo that you want it to be. You still are main decking Secret Village. Do not underestimate this card. Alright? Secret Village locking your opponent right now is one of the best things that you can have. Especially, like, look at an odd deck like this. Like, this card is going to get you the places that you need to be. Still doing 1 copy of the Cyclone, 1 copy of the Tempest, 1 copy of the Tornado. It's pretty standard. We're also playing 1 copy of the Dynamite, the Power Load Draco Slayer in here. And now, you might find this a little bit odd, but we are doing 2 crossouts in here. Looking at this list, I understand why you couldn't find the room for a 3rd. Just, you're kind of like, oh, okay, like, no real need to push this. This card right here is the reason why you want to focus on things. It's also not like you can't pull in the additional one if you really need to. You also have plenty of Fenrir's down here in the side deck as well. Fenrir being able to board in here in a mode that you need to put the pressure on your opponent is going to be very good. And of course, hey look, some anti-fun for the Tenpai Dragons. Actually, dropping this card on Tenpai is actually incredibly strong. And also for those Tenpai Dragon techs out here, they're actually packing in triple copies of the Threatening Roar. Like, genuinely, this is kind of the funniest crap I've actually seen out here so far. The fact that your opponent goes to attempt to OTK, you're like, nope, and then you do all of this fun little shenanigans, and then, you know, you back up on the Tempest, Tornado, and the Cyclone, and you kind of win the game. Like, that's the experience of playing Magispector. I feel like this card's really good, by the way. Just want to point that out. And our last list here, wow, Standard Sword Soul. So I was pretty vocal about Standard Sword Soul. That Nibiru just craters this deck off into the sunset, because on that 5th summon, you're usually going to have the Chizao up and running, and you'd be generating the token off of this. Alright, that's usually about how this works. But what we found ourselves doing now is, now that Protos has returned back to the game, players have begun re-exploring different option trees with Sword Soul, trying to, well, mess around with the Protos lockout here to be able to punish your opponent. And speaking of punishment, I do see that we actually have a Sky Crisis down here as well. This has definitely been a much more nice card to have. Now the Barons cut, I mean, you have a slot, right? And we've also been noticing Land Phonicus kind of starting to show up a little bit. This is an interesting little tech choice. It's also has no effect, so, I mean, hey, you know, it's exactly what you want, right? Those beautiful, beautiful, beautiful little guys to get out of the way. I see we are also playing the Shifters down here in the side deck, which is fine. This deck has no real problem shiftering. Sometimes it can be a little inconvenience, but it's not the most unwinnable situation in the world. Still focusing on the 1 blackout. And his build is actually packing in triple Solemn Strike down here as well. I mean, hey, Strike definitely guarantees you can spot remove a monster effect without losing half of your life points. That's one big thing. Like, Judgment versus this, I think the Strike's much more important, because as long as you typically set up your board here, maybe a Chow Fang, you're probably going to be in a pretty good position. So, that's all we have for today. What do you guys think? Please, leave a comment down below. Tell me what you guys think, and I'll see your beautiful faces back here later in the day, guys. Patrons, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos.